If you want to start cooking more at home, but your cooking skills aren't that great, it can be a little intimidating to get started, but I taught myself how to cook and you can too. So today I'm going to share with you how I did it. So being in this situation where you don't have a ton of cooking skills, I think is super common, especially now, because so many people didn't learn how to cook growing up. And so I just want to tell you first off that you're not alone. This isn't like a weird thing. A lot of other people are in your shoes. A lot of my one-on-one clients find themselves in this situation, and that's one of the big reasons they come to me, is because they're like, I don't know how to cook anything. I want to try to eat healthier, but I don't know how to make that happen. So you're not alone, and it is something that you can learn how to do. It's never too late to get started, and the great news is that now there are so many resources out there that the information is so easy to access. It makes the whole process a lot easier. So I started teaching myself how to cook around the end of high school, and for me growing up, I grew up in a home where it wasn't like my parents never cooked anything, but they also weren't chefs and they didn't cook all the time, and they had their group of recipes and things that they kind of knew how to make from what their parents had taught them, or the things that they had started making when they became adults. So growing up, I learned a few things here and there, but I wasn't super confident in my cooking skills, and I didn't know a lot of different techniques. So when I was near the end of high school, I was interested in food and nutrition, and I started to become interested in cooking, and I wanted to learn how to make different recipes and really start to learn some different techniques, especially things that maybe were becoming popular at that time, but weren't things that my parents were really familiar with. Because when I was coming out of high school, it was kind of at this time where, we were starting to have more things like the Food Network with lots of different recipe shows and cooking shows to teach you different things. We had started to get, some online recipes, access to that sort of thing, but it was also before we really had the big boom with YouTube and Instagram and blogs and all of these types of online resources. So for me, I really started by picking a Rachel Ray recipe, actually. I was home for the summer, I was on summer break, and I was watching Rachel Ray, and she made a recipe, and I was like, you know what? I want to try to make that. And so I went online, I pulled the recipe up, and I started going through it. I made my list of ingredients. My little brother was home too for the summer, and so we kind of said we're going to do this together, and I drove us to the store, and we got everything, and we brought it home, and we started cooking. Now, I pretty much had no idea what I was doing. I mean, I had learned how to cook a few things that I could do pretty easily at that age, like learning how to make scrambled eggs or things like that, but I hadn't cooked a real recipe, like a whole meal, all on my own before. Again, I had helped here and there with things with my parents when they were cooking, but I had never been in charge and planned a meal and made the whole thing myself from start to finish. So this was kind of a big deal, and it was also pretty exciting to, be independent and get the ingredients and start off and try to make this meal on my own. And the recipe I made, I'm pretty sure it was like a poached chicken breast thing, so we had to get some chicken broth and the chicken, and there were some different vegetables in there, and I followed the instructions, I did what the recipe said, and by the end I had a really good meal, and I was feeling pretty proud of myself. And it kind of went on from there. I started finding different recipes I wanted to try, started making them, just following the instructions. I started to get a few different cookbooks and use the recipes from there. People I'd seen on television and I liked their food, so I'll get their cookbook and try to learn how to make the stuff that they make. That was the start for me, and I think that's a great place to start for anyone who's just a beginning cook, is to find recipes that look good to you, that you like, maybe cookbooks that are at your skill level, but the recipes are kind of, in your vein of foods that you like to eat, and start working your way through, because a big part of this is just practice. As you start going through recipes, you're gonna learn different cooking skills. That was the case for me. The first time I had to saute up an onion at the beginning of a recipe, I had to kind of pay attention to what did that mean, what temperature does the pan need to be set at, and how much oil do I need in the pan, and how long do I cook it, and what should it look like before I move on to the next step. But once you do that, then you kind of know how that works, and you can go on from there. So every time you make a recipe, you're also going to be learning all of these little skills throughout the process. And that's something with my clients who aren't familiar with cooking, when they start going through this and start learning some of this stuff, that's a big thing for them. They're like, I made this recipe, but to make this recipe, I had to learn how to do this and do this and do this. And so in that process, you start to pick up these skills. And as you cook more and more and more, you start to become more and more comfortable. And then these things start to become more second nature, and you start to feel a lot more confident in your skills and your ability to start improvising a little and trying out some different things. Another thing for me with teaching myself how to cook was also becoming comfortable with different ingredients. So starting to work with things that maybe I hadn't worked with before. So in the beginning, I do think it's a good idea to start off with some things you're familiar with. Looking at maybe a recipe that uses ingredients that you already know that you like and maybe you've used before in small ways here or there. Also, if there is, a favorite recipe out there, say something that your family makes all the time, like a favorite family recipe, or if you have a friend, they've made this thing before and you liked it and it was really good, finding those recipes that you already know that you really like and just want to learn how to cook yourself, that's a great place to begin. And you can start with that, and then you can start to layer on new ingredients, new types of recipes that maybe you're not as familiar with, that maybe you haven't eaten before. And so it's just about taking it step by step, learning those skills, and then improving upon those and going on to the next thing. So for me, I started off, using cookbooks. Everything I cooked was from a recipe. And when I would do meal planning, I would sit out with all of these cookbooks all over the table. That was something I started doing, was doing meal planning for my family, because I wanted to start making these recipes and learning how to do them. My mom was like, sure, go for it. So I started doing meal planning for the week and making the grocery list and doing all of that. And I would sit out with, my favorite cookbooks, and I would flip through and try to find things. And I started to learn favorite recipes, things that I would make again and again because I love them and my family loved them. And I would also start to weave in some different recipes from the cookbooks that I hadn't made before, and that was how I cooked. Everything was from a recipe. But then as time went on and I got more confident in my skills, I started to learn, to make a soup, you need to do this, this, and this, and combine these sorts of things, and that's probably gonna turn out and taste good, for example. And so the more and more you're cooking, you're using these recipes, you kind of start to learn these rules. You start to see themes throughout recipes. Oh, to make this type of dish, I always start this way. Or these types of flavors really go well together. So if I put them in a meal, they're probably gonna taste good. Or these spices taste good on this vegetable, but these taste good on this other vegetable. You start to learn these things as you cook more and more and go through these recipes and see the things that pop up again and again. And then moving on from there, near the end of college is when I really started to branch out more from recipes and start making things up, just kind of on the fly. I was still using a lot of recipes at that time, but once I wasn't in the dorm anymore and I was cooking every single night, because when I lived in the dorm, I would cook when I was home for breaks or home for the summer or whatever, but the rest of that time I had a meal plan and I was eating on campus because I didn't have a kitchen to use. But once I moved out and I had a kitchen and I didn't have to do a meal plan anymore and I could cook dinner for myself every single night, all year round, I really started to become even more confident, and it gave me that opportunity to start to branch out and try things on my own. And another thing I think it's important to recognize with teaching yourself how to cook and getting started as a beginner is that things don't have to be this huge gourmet experience. Things aren't going to turn out perfect every time, and that's totally fine. Start with simple recipes and then just let yourself graduate up, and also know that you're going to get faster and faster as you cook more too, because I think for a lot of people when they start cooking, they're like, this takes forever, I have to keep looking at the recipe again and again, it takes me so long to get these ingredients chopped up and all of that. But again, with practice, you're gonna get faster and faster at doing those things. You'll start to learn systems and different things you can do to be more efficient and make things happen, and you're not gonna have to look at the recipes as closely because you are gonna become more comfortable. So that time factor will also start to become less of an issue because you're just going to be getting faster and faster and faster the more you do it. And everything you make isn't going to taste good necessarily. I mean, if you're following a proven recipe, your chances are pretty good, if you're doing what the recipe says, that it's probably going to taste all right. But at the same time, there are going to be times when things just don't turn out. You make a mistake or you try to improvise and it doesn't exactly come out the way you would want it to. And just know that those things are going to happen, and that's totally fine, because I think a lot of times people start to cook and then things don't turn out right, or they're even just worried about things not turning out great, and that stops them from trying. Know that those things are going to happen, and that happens to me sometimes still. I still make things sometimes and I'm like, this isn't really that good, you know? But that's totally fine. It's not a big deal. It's just one meal. And that's also another thing you can learn from. That's that learning experience where you can say, hey, I did this and it didn't work out so well. Or maybe just like, this recipe isn't very good, so I don't think I want to make it again. And so picking back up with my story, at the end of college, I felt pretty confident with my cooking skills. I felt, you know, comfortable in the kitchen, comfortable trying new things. I kind of had a few things that I knew that I liked and all of that. But I got to have another learning experience when I got married, because then I wasn't just cooking for myself, I was cooking for Jason as well. So, you know, with that, it changed a lot of the way I did things. For one, when I was just cooking for myself, I didn't make dinner every single night of the week. I would just make a big batch of something and then maybe eat off of that for a couple days, and then, you know, make a big batch of something else, eat off of that for a couple days, because a typical recipe makes 4 to 6 portions, and when you're cooking for just one person, that means you have a lot of leftovers, and I personally really like leftovers, so that was kind of my routine and how I did things. But once I was cooking for 2 people, there weren't going to be as many leftovers to have, so that had to change my routine, and also I had to take someone else's preferences into consideration, so that was a whole another stage of me learning how to cook, because I had to cook in a different way. I had to keep in mind not only what I liked, but also what Jason liked and what types of things he maybe doesn't love so much, and all of that kind of stuff in my meal planning as well. And so for me, I definitely was lucky that I started to learn how to cook earlier, because it started off with me just kind of cooking for myself, cooking things for my family who wasn't really that worried about it anyways, because they, you know, didn't meal plan for every single night, so it was kind of like an extra thing, and I had the freedom to experiment, and then I was just cooking for myself, so, you know, I could make things and it was just about me and my preferences, and then I got, you know, to that step up to cooking for someone else and taking that into consideration. I know everyone isn't going to have that situation. Maybe you already are cooking for 1 or 2 or 3 other people, so it's going to be a little bit different experience for you, but that's okay too. You know, this is just my personal experience and how I did it, and I think it can be really helpful for you to give you some ideas, but also know that it doesn't have to go exactly this way. There's really no right or wrong here. The point is just that there's a ton of information out there, so many recipes and resources and videos that you can learn how to do this, and it doesn't have to be scary or intimidating. Things don't have to turn out perfect, but the more that you do it, just like any other skill, you're gonna get better and better and better, and as you gain those skills, it's just gonna get easier and easier and easier for you. And I'm at a point where I feel super comfortable in the kitchen. I feel comfortable combining different flavors and making stuff up and seeing how it turns out, and you know, that really works well for me, and I don't have to use recipes all the time. Now, for the most part, I don't use recipes at all. I still love cookbooks because I like to get different ideas, and again, to help me upgrade a little bit and say, oh, I never thought of making that way, or I never thought of combining those 2 things together. So it's still a process that I'm going through, but for the most part, I don't really use recipes in my day-to-day cooking. And if you've watched any of my Cook With Me live streams where I make dinner with you live and take you through the process, you see that my meals usually aren't anything super complicated or intense or really involved. It's just a few simple things that I know how to do, and I know how to put them together, and I combine them to make really delicious meals. And so the big point with all of this is I just want to encourage you to get started. You can totally do it, and a lot of times the biggest hurdle is just that first step. But once you do that, you start to get your feet wet and try some different things. It's just going to get easier from there, and I know that you can totally do it because cooking isn't hard. It's just about learning those skills that maybe you haven't learned before, and you can learn them for sure. So I hope you found this helpful. Let me know in the comments if you have any other questions about cooking or cooking skills or things in this kind of area that you'd like to learn more about from me. And if you are new here and you want more healthy eating tips and nutrition info and videos like this one, then make sure that you subscribe, because eating healthy and living a healthy lifestyle really doesn't have to be complicated, and I'm going to show you how to do it. And if you want to watch some more videos, I have a couple linked over here that you might like. Thanks for watching. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll talk to you next time.